My name is Juliana Nicolasian with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Friday, August 21st, 2009, and I am in Tulsa, Oklahoma, interviewing Jacqueline C. Longacre. This interview is being conducted as part of the inductees of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame Oral History Project. Jacqueline Longacre was inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame in 1993. Thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Well, let's begin by learning a little bit more about you. Could you start with where you grew up and give us a little background into your early life?
I consider myself an oil field brat. I grew up mostly in and around Wewoka, Oklahoma, which is in Seminole County. However, I was born in Roebling, Louisiana, the same little town in Louisiana where Thomas A. Gilchrist was born. He brought a great deal more money to Oklahoma than I did. Then my family moved to New London, Texas. And then we moved to Wewoka. We moved north of town to the Butner community, and then Wewoka, and then south of town at the Kite community, and then Justice community, moving as my father's work required it. And that plays a significant part in my early life and early development because I learned to adapt, but also I had a family that was extremely supportive and all the way helped me to adjust to whatever. But we also had a small community of people that worked with my father in the oil field, his gang, and that provided a great deal of our social life. In the process of growing up as I did, I had a great deal of freedom. We had our own little bike gang, quotes, that was gone for most of the day out in the country, exploring, finding things, walking pipes across creeks and swimming in gravel pits and smoking grapevines and whatever. And our parents did not worry about us. They did not hover over us. So we had that freedom, but we also had the social context of a group of people that played together, partied together. Like we would have every 4th of July, a big 4th of July picnic at the lake or at Falls Creek or somewhere. Turner Falls, not Falls Creek. That's a Baptist term. And that really was the context in which I was reared, is that extended community. I am forgetting the way you go, but we always stayed tied to my father's family in Louisiana. That was our extended family. We went down there at least twice a year. And very often I stayed the summers with my grandparents or with my aunts and uncles and cousins there. That was important in our life for many reasons. So family has always been the key that has held me together and helped to mold the life that I had.
So tell me a little bit about the schools growing up. You moved around a little bit, but surely you had some interesting times at school?
Well, I started to school. We moved to Oklahoma when I was 5 years old. Not quite 5. I started to school at Butner, which was a small rural grade school, junior high, high school. And the principal let my mother start me, even though I wasn't quite old enough to start. And then he had to tell her she had to take me out because everybody wanted to start their child. My older brother was already in school there, as was my uncle and aunt, who my mother and father raised. It was my mother's brother and sister. And very early in my school experience, I had a fight with somebody who tried to take my brother's hat and stomp it in the ground. So I was not a peacemaking child at that point in time. But that was my beginning. And then we moved into town where I went to Compton for a little over a year. And I don't remember that school very well because it was not a great deal of import in my life. But then we moved to Kite, which was the old Judy Lee's school. And I had a lot of friends there. I had wonderful teachers. I was made to believe that I could sing, even though I can't carry a tune in a bucket. The teachers and my parents were partners in child rearing and education. And I had that caring experience in the school. I also knew, because that was during wartime, that one of my teacher's husband got killed in the war, and we experienced that and that community caring about her. I rode the bus to school, and one of our students got run over and killed as he got off the bus and went across the road. And that was another experience that the community came together. That was a really significant time. I had friends until right now. A lot of my early friends are dying off. I'm going to funerals now more than anything. And I still had, until a little over a year ago, one of the friends is a very close friend that I made in the second grade. And she contacted me after we had been apart for about 2 years. We hadn't contacted, and she wanted to know about my mother and my dad and how they were doing. And she said, you know, your birthday party when you were 8 years old was the first time I tasted angel food cake. I mean, those kind of memories are very important. Then we went to Justice School, which was an interesting experience. All of these are small rural schools where we had very close, careful teaching by people that were supported by our parents. At Justice, one of the things I remember very vividly was the fact that me being as tall as I am, I played basketball in grade school, and we had a championship basketball team, but we were the last basketball team in the United States to wear bloomers and middies and neckties. And I went home mortified, telling my mother that we had to wear this as our basketball uniform. And she took my bloomers and pulled the elastic up and folded it down and sewed a hem in the bloomers so that I had shorts. And then every other team member had her do that to their bloomers, except for the principal's niece who lived with her. And she had, and you know, you would dribble down the court, and it was full court. I mean, it was half court basketball back in those days. And you would dribble, and you'd have to pull up your bloomer leg if it came down to your knees. So but we had a good basketball team. We had to practice boys against girls because we didn't have enough for a full team to practice. So sometimes we played boys throughs and sometimes we played girls throughs. Same thing true with softball. We had to practice boys against girls. We had a teacher I moved to Justice in 4th grade or nearly in 5th grade. And we had a teacher who insisted that we had to listen to good music. And she would play opera for us on her phonograph. And we read a lot. Reading has always been extremely important to me. And in the 4th grade, I read Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. I also read and read and read until I had an eye injury that made me wear a black patch for a year, and I couldn't go to a movie in the school. We had our first movie that was a cartoon while I could not. I had to sit in the other room while the kids watched the movie. I could not read a book for a year. And it was a very difficult year in my life. I nearly lost my eye. But there were things about it that were interesting in terms of we had always had pets. My father raised bird dogs. And at one time we had 21 bird dogs. We had 3 pairs of bird dogs. Brown pointer, brown spotted pointer, a yellow spotted pointer, and Irish setters. And all 3 bitches had babies at the same time. And those dogs roamed with me on my bike. And I got given a pair of pedal pushers, denim pedal pushers, as a gift from my aunt. And I loved them. And I had them on when I ran and broadsided the female Irish setter who was pregnant and went over the handlebars and slid into the rock gravel road and did my hand and tore my pedal pushers all to pieces. And she went on home and had babies. In addition to the bird dogs, we had squirrels, rabbits, whatever. There were times when we went to Louisiana, even during the war, because we used a barrel of drip gas in the back of the car and used that as our gas, so Mother and Dad didn't have to use their rationing coupons. And we had a squirrel that we took to Louisiana with us, and a rabbit that we took to Louisiana with us, and a pair of bird dogs, and 3 kids and a mother and father, because my uncle and aunt were grown and gone by this time. And we went into a restaurant to eat and came out, and my dad tried to pass a car because we took presents and we took nuts and things like that. And his accelerator wouldn't go down. And he pulled over the side of the road. The squirrel had gotten into the nuts and had hidden a nut under his accelerator so it would not go down. I mean, this was an entourage and we spent lots of time down there when we went down because it was a nice long drive that we had to undertake. That and one time while I was in bed with my eye, it was wintertime, and the squirrel entertained me because it would get in this window on one side of my bed and lick the ice off, race across the bed to the other window and lick the ice, and I would try to sneak up on him, turn around and chatter at me, and then get across at the other window. And we played like that forever. But the squirrel also chewed a hole in my gold Stetson hat and made a nest in it because that had been my Christmas present that year. An outfit with gold leather vest and a gold hat and boots and a skirt that was trimmed in gold leather. A lot of freedom, a lot of being able to go to a rock that I loved and read. And yet at the same time, parents that cared a great deal for us and set a good example for us. So the freedom and the example are the things that I think determine my life.
And high school?
I went on the bus to Wewoka to high school the first year. Oh, there were 8 of us graduated from the 8th grade. A friend and I had to draw straws to see who gave the valedictory address and who gave the salutatory address. Our parents decorated the stage completely with a backdrop of roses in chicken wire. And I can still remember one line from the valedictory address, which I gave, which was, Marie Antoinette, poor woman, struck a match. It was given to me to memorize. And so then I took bus into town that freshman year. And then my family moved into town because my father did a different kind of, still oil field, but a different kind of work. And went the 3 years in Wewoka High School after we moved to town too. So 4 years in Wewoka High School. I still go to high school reunions. My next year will be my 60th. I still have lots of friends from high school that I stay in touch with. Unfortunately, as I say, a lot of them, I'm going to funerals now too much, too often. In high school, math, history, and English literature, I guess, were my 3 favorite subjects. I had an early class of driver education. Went to the state driving contest, which was interesting. We did not have anything but intramural sports for girls in Wewoka High School. But I did play basketball intramurally. And we also had a football game every year where we suited up and played football, and the football team suited up and were cheerleaders. Some very good teachers who knew their subjects well and who were trusted by our parents. Mrs. Williams was my teacher who taught geometry, trigonometry, math subject. And Lucy B. Sitton was the English teacher. And she demanded a lot in terms of using your head to think about what you're reading. And also in challenging us. My brother was in high school at the same time I was, my older brother. We had problems occasionally because one time he came into the classroom. It was my day to drive the car, but he wanted the keys and I wouldn't give them to him. He played football and was supposed to go to Tulsa University on a football scholarship. And the Korean War came, and he got mobilized with the National Guard right after graduating from high school. He and I graduated at the same time because he occasionally goofed off. And one of the interesting things, like he was Lucy B. Sitton's favorite, and he had to write a paper before he could get his diploma. When we were practicing for graduation, he handed her a paper that I wrote in my handwriting. And she looked at him and said, "Bob, why couldn't you do this sooner?" She was a handwriting expert. And she let him get away with it because for her at that point in time, it was more important that he graduate. High school, we had lots of really important people. The woman who helped to develop and found the Sweet Adelines program in Oklahoma graduated in my class. A vice president of a major oil company in Texas graduated in my class. The man who created Garfield and did the first few episodes of Garfield graduated the year ahead of me. The president of the Southern Railroad in Texas graduated the year ahead of me. A major general in the Army graduated the year ahead of me. They were academically solid. We were academically solid, self-learning, challenged. And when I went to Oklahoma State University, when it was Oklahoma A&M, the first year I had to take some courses that I passed without doing too much study on because I had a better education, I think, than did people who graduated from major high schools in Tulsa and Oklahoma City. One of the questions along the way asked, oh, that's on down the road, but the question was, who do you have to thank for what's it? And there are a lot of people I have to thank because we are a mixture of all the significant people in our lives. The parents, the teachers, the cohorts. But there was one event that happened that I would say I have to thank them, and that is a couple of recruiting Air Force recruiters who I decided I was going to go in the Air Force. And they interviewed me. And they looked at me and said, no, we don't want you now. Go to college, get your degree. And then if you decide you want the Air Force, we will welcome you. And that, was one curve I took that someone else really played an important role in.
Why the military?
I don't know. It was, I was not aware of everything that was open to you. I didn't know what I wanted to major in if I went to college. I thought it sounded romantic to be in the military and that I could go to officer school. And my brother had been in the National Guard, so I was exposed to it a little bit that way. And both my brothers went major military in their lives for various and sundry reasons. So other than that, I don't know. We had been through World War II. I was, 9 years old at Pearl Harbor. And we had German prisoners of war in our hometown, which was interesting. On one of our trips, my mother and father were the people who taught me how to organize, one, how to be caring about the world around you and the people around you, how to be loving, how to laugh, how to have fun. But on one of our trips to Louisiana, on the way back, we picked up an airman who was hitchhiking. My mother always helped my grandfather rob the bees while we were there because she would do it. And we had cans of honey in the car, one of which came open and spilled all over the airman's clothes. Mother and Dad took him home with them, cleaned up his clothes, got him all ready to go on, and bought him a bus ticket to where he was going. We were going into the movie for a preview on a Saturday night. My father worked sometimes 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. He would come home whenever they shut down a rig in the middle of the night, wake us all up. Mother would go kill chickens, clean them, fry them, make potato salad. I made banana pudding. We would load up the car and go camping at the lake for as long as he had off. And my mother was famous for her fried chicken and biscuits. I'm getting sort of sidetracking.
You're fine.
And we went to the preview that night, and on the way home, my dad swerved the car. And this was when we lived at Kite. We had like 14 miles to drive. He swerved the car because he thought he saw a sack of potatoes in the road. He pulled off, walked back, and a person got up out of the road and started running. My dad caught her and got her into the car with us. And we took her home with us. And she was trying to kill herself because her father was going to make her marry someone that she didn't want to marry. We kept her a few days while Mother and Dad talked with her. And you have to picture my father, who is 6'4", with arms that were quite muscular due to the work he did. He could hold his arm out like this, and we could hold on his wrists on each side, and he could lift us off the ground. So my father went to reason with her father. And the upshot of it was they eventually took her home, and she married the person she wanted to marry. Our house was always open to people. One friend of ours had a woman in the mental hospital. They would bring her home on a visit and would bring her to our house to eat. And that was an interesting experience. But I looked at her, and this was when I was quite young, and decided that she had to be cleaned up. And I shampooed her hair, which was cruddy that thick, all in her head. And she came to visit us frequently when she was on visits. Mother and Dad organized, or my mother organized, the people, the wives on the gang, to give physical therapy to one of the wives who had been badly burned. Before her husband ever came to work for my father. and they had wanted to cut the muscle on the back of her leg because she couldn't stand up and walk. And they started giving physical therapy, and she walked. And she was the mother of my friend of the angel food cake. And that woman, 90-something now, still dances at the Senior Citizen Center. So those are the kind, long-term relationships, caring relationships, helping each other. And that's what I grew up in. Mother and Dad partied whenever they could. They used to go to the dances at Johnny Lee Wills and Bob Wills in Seminole, Oklahoma. They came to Seminole, I think, every 2 weeks on a Saturday night. And the band, most of them came home with us after the dance, and Mother fixed fried chicken, biscuits and gravy, and scrambled eggs. And one of the band members, whose name was Shamblin, this was during the war, I don't know why I remember his name, had a family emergency in Texas, and he could not get home to his family. And Mother and Dad gave him their gas coupons so he could buy gas for his car to go home. Because we didn't need it with drip gas available to run our car. I've gotten sidetracked off of my high school education and college.
Well, when you were growing up, did you have any aspirations? You wanted to be a teacher? You knew what career path you wanted to go down? I know you kind of were wavering in high school, not really sure, but did you have any indication of what you wanted to be?
No. In fact, I did not really see myself as growing up. In fact, I may still be trying to decide what I want to be if I ever grow up. That it's interesting. I went to college without knowing what I wanted to do.
Why Oklahoma A&M?
Because I got a scholarship. It was offered through the Extension Service to go there for my first year. I got a small stipend scholarship. I worked all the way through college.
Where'd you work?
I ran the elevator in the dorm. I worked in the kitchen. I eventually worked in the Dean of Graduate School's office. Whatever I had that was available that fit my schedule that I could do. I took a general arts and science course, which was wonderful that I did that. I could not have planned my education any better if I had intentionally set out to get the education I had. I had 2 years of a general arts and science, and I decided I had to major in something. So I majored in accounting and economics. And I graduated in 4 years with 10 hours of graduate credit in accounting. I think it was 10 hours in accounting and economics. I decided that I wanted to go to South America, to Venezuela, as an accountant with an oil company. And interviewed for that. While that was being decided, I went home to Wewoka and straightened up books for a friend of ours that had a business whose bookkeeper had royally messed up his books. And then I hired and trained him a bookkeeper. while I was doing that, a friend of mine who was head of DHS, Department of Human Services, for that county, asked me to take the exam to be a caseworker and work there. While that was going on, I got word from the oil company that they did not send single women to Venezuela, which really ticked me off. So I took the exam to be a caseworker on my lunch hour, went to work for Seminole County Department of Welfare, and had a caseload of 450 old age, aid to the disabled, and aid to dependent children, and started providing those services in mostly Seminole and the rural area around Seminole. My supervisor was a woman called Nidra Hankins, who was wonderful. And she immediately said, "You're going to social work school on a department scholarship." And I said, okay. But the experiences that I had, like my first real social work, was a man who was an old age assistant who lived on the edge of Seminole. So I drove by his house almost every time I went to Seminole to do my cases. And I stopped to do his annual visit. And I read his record before I went, the year before. And in it was the fact that he had a sore, pretty bad sore on his hand. When I visited with him and saw he had a bandage on his hand, I said, "Is that the same sore you had a year ago?" And he said, "Yes." And thus began my harassing him for medical care. He finally told me that he had gone to University Hospital and they wanted to cut his hand off because it was cancer, and that he wasn't about to let them cut his hand off. And I stopped to see him every time, and I finally got him to agree that if I could get him seen in medical clinic rather than surgical clinic, that he would go back to University Hospital. So we made all those arrangements. He went to medical clinic. They did not cut his hand off. They did radiation and saved his hand. And that felt good. I was 23 years old. I also had some interesting experiences along the way, and some funny experiences along the way. But I kept that caseload, and I developed relationships with my clientele and did my first year of graduate work at OU. I had applied for and been admitted to Tulane. And the Department of Welfare sent their personnel man down to tell me if I got a scholarship, I had to go to OU because they needed students. And that really ticked me off because I wanted to go to Tulane. But anyway, I went to OU, and they asked me why I was so late interviewing to come to be admitted there, and I told them why, and that I was a reluctant student. The person interviewing me also did not cotton to the fact that I wore springolators.
What's that?
You don't know what springolators
No.
are? It's a shoe with a heel that is totally backless and has a thing across the front and a strap in the middle that causes it to cling to your foot.
Okay.
they're not social work professional looking. So we discussed my spring-o-laters when I was being interviewed. One of the funny experiences I had before I went to social work school, however, was a man, and I did things that I thought was right, to stand up for my clients that were my responsibility. I did the first appeal of a decision of the department from Seminole County to get this person certified for aid to the disabled. Also, I had a client that had his feet frozen, and that was why he was applying for aid to the disabled. And he had to go to Oklahoma City to the work evaluation clinic. And I had trouble tracking him down. I would get him appointments and he wouldn't keep them. Finally, we were officed in the Seminole County Courthouse. One of the jailers told me that they had this man in jail. One of the sheriff's deputies told me they had this man in jail. I said, keep him there until I can get him an appointment and you can take him to Oklahoma City to the work evaluation clinic, which they did. And when he came back, he was your clients get to where they know your car. And the minute you drive into the neighborhood, they're there. And I drove into the neighborhood after he came back, and he waved his arms and ran out in front of the car and stopped me. And he said, Miss Wood, he said, I'm disabled. I went to that work evaluation clinic and they told me that I was disabled, that I was the most disabled man they'd ever seen in their life. He said, do you know what? One of my nuts is smaller than the other one. So that was my noble introduction into the profession.
What year did you start working with Seminole County?
In Seminole County, I graduated from college in '54.
Okay.
And I went back to Seminole County and worked for that summer. And then I went to DHS in '55. And then I went to OU in '55, '56, and graduated. And I dropped out a year, and worked on my thesis and worked off what I owed the department, which was another interesting experience. I was one of the youngest supervisors for the Department of Human Services in Tulsa County. Mm-hmm. And then I went back and graduated. I went back on a work study program with Griffin Memorial Hospital in Norman. And I worked weekends covering the hospital for the social work department and went to school. And then I had my field placement also at Griffin.
Well, what I'd like you to do is kind of take me, you started your early career, try to just take me through your career.
Well, just to highlight, I graduated. I worked at Griffin Memorial. I was hired for the social work department there. Worked there. I did a men's admission ward, a men's acute and intensive treatment ward, and a men's chronic patient ward. I was a social worker for 3 wards at Griffin. In that time, I met my husband there, and we got married. And he was living and working in Tulsa for vocational rehabilitation when we did get married. And I moved to Tulsa. So I started working for the Child Welfare Department of DHS as a district. Well, I was hired as a social worker for the Child Protective Unit in Tulsa County. And the person who was in charge of that unit died very soon after I got there. So I took over the Child Protective Unit in Tulsa County and ran that for a period of time, handling all the cases of abuse, neglect of children in Tulsa County. Then my husband was transferred. He was vocational rehabilitation. Was transferred to Eastern State Hospital in Veneta, and they called and wanted me to come to work for them. So I moved with him to Eastern State and headed up what was called the Hospital Improvement Project and supervised staff there. Then in 65, we moved back to Tulsa. And I was in charge of the aftercare program for the Department of Mental Health in Tulsa County. While I was doing that job, because I had had a board of directors or a board advisory board when I was with Child Welfare Protective Unit, several of the people in Tulsa County were on the board of Planned Parenthood. And I was asked to apply for the job of executive director of Planned Parenthood when that was coming open, which I did. And I was director of Planned Parenthood in Tulsa for 18 years. During that time, I was widowed. I was left with a child 5, a girl 5, a girl 7, and a boy 12. And sort of stayed put while I got them raised. And I was very busy with Planned Parenthood because this was very much a part of the Right to Life agitation. And, I would have to go down to the clinic in the middle of the night because windows would be broken out, had to deal with protesting, had to, deal with the fact that they were boycotting the United Way because Planned Parenthood got some funds from the United Way, had to deal with the police would not let me work at night because the shot to my window in my office from a bridge across from it was a pretty direct shot. So they did not want me working at night. Planned Parenthood was my major time when I could do the things which I think got me nominated, even though this was in Tulsa and I was nominated while I was in Enid. I was an advocate for women's health issues and for child health issues. I learned how to do lobbying. I learned how to organize, to try to accomplish things, to educate about public policy issues that should be educated about. And I think that that work is the major thing. It's not that I consider myself an extremely good administrator and an extremely good community organizer. I know how to take a group of people, because I learned it at my mother and father's knee, and focus on trying to accomplish something together, getting the strength from everybody's suggestions and putting it into a workforce that I supported, got them what they needed to do the best job they could do, gave them credit for what they did, worked to make sure they had good salaries. And that, I never worked in a program, took over an agency, or left it in anything but better than what I found it. When I took over Planned Parenthood, that was an interesting experience, because the person who had been director of Planned Parenthood for a number of years took resources from Planned Parenthood to match, to get a federal family planning grant, which was directed to the health department. And she set herself up as head of that family planning project with the City County Health Department. And this is part of what has to be very carefully edited.
Sure.
And I walked into the job, my accounting and economics and social work, perfect background for what I was going to do. The staff met me almost at the door saying, "We've got to talk to you." And we sat down and they said, one, her goal is to put Planned Parenthood out of business in a year. She has stated that that's what she's going to do. Two, we think it has been problematic that she took money, resources, to get this grant without giving back to Planned Parenthood. So anyway, we began a struggle for a number of months to, one, get some funding, family planning funding for Planned Parenthood, and the other to provide the services in a way that assured that there would be a Planned Parenthood around for a number of years. One of the things we found out, she claimed she had 2,500 patients that she served every year. And when we got rid of all of the folders that had not been in for the last few years, we had 1,600 patients. Had a good staff who worked hard. And in the years that I was director of Planned Parenthood, we grew from 1,600 to over 10,000 patients served in a year. And we counted real patients served, not cases that were folders up in the files that had never been served. We had a broad program of education, public affairs, clinic services, family planning, and vasectomies. We provided services in Broken Arrow and several spots in Tulsa, as well as in Western Arkansas. We moved into Western Arkansas. It was a major political stubborn process to bring the health department to the point of acknowledging and accepting the fact that Planned Parenthood was here to stay and we were a major force, and we did get some family planning money. She eventually went on to the regional office of Health and Human Services for the Family Planning Division. And we developed good working relationships with the health department people. But one of the things that happened early on after this grant was made to City County Health Department, a couple of people in City County asked me to go to lunch. And they wanted me to apply for that job because they did not want her in it. And I told them, no way would I apply for that job. Working with the board was a new experience for me, and it was a great experience. I had to clarify some things as to role of an executive director versus role of the board, because she had abdicated some of her responsibilities to the board because she took over some of their responsibilities. So we had to get those working relationships out. It was an interesting, productive 18 years. I was very busy raising my family, and my family has always been the key in my life. I have 3 wonderful children who are grown, who are, I think, happy, able to make friends, and are productive. And I got 4 not great-grands, but 4 great-grandchildren. I thought that I was never going to have any because I had my kids late in life because I married late, although I married a 40-year-old and adopted him. He's now just reached his 53rd birthday, and my youngest is 42. But I always kept that focus that the most important thing in my life were my children. But was able to work with Planned Parenthood and to do advocacy. Planned Parenthood, while I was executive director, got 4-year reaffiliations every year that we were studied, which is the review that they did to make sure that you were a good, productive, well-run, solid financially Planned Parenthood. 1 year, we got the Fairchild Award, which was the highest reward you could get for being a quality service affiliate, private nonprofit. It was a wonderful 18 years. There became some things in relationship to Planned Parenthood that made me decide to go ahead and try to find work elsewhere. I didn't hurry to do it, but my kids were grown. I didn't have that responsibility anymore. I stayed pretty much in the same church because they helped me raise my kids after my husband died. My family helped me raise my kids after my husband died. And it was time for me to look elsewhere. So I decided to go to work for Planned Parenthood in Dallas, Texas. It did not take me very long to find out that there were, if you were young, single, and rich, Dallas was a great place to live. I was only one of those 3 that was single, not young and rich. And while that was going on, I wanted to come back to Oklahoma. And someone whom I had worked with at OSU, AHEC, Area Health Education Center, asked me if I'd be interested in going to Enid because they were starting an Area Health Education Center in Enid and needed someone out there. They had hired a director for a very short time who really in a very short time messed things up a little bit. And so I took that job and moved to Enid, which was where I was living when the award was given. The Area Health Education Center development there provided me a great deal of leeway because we covered 26 counties of western Oklahoma, all the way out to the Panhandle and all the way down to the southwest corner of the state.
It's a big area.
A big area. About 7 of those counties were considered frontier. 9 maybe, less than 7 people per square mile. I hired a staff because the previous person had not done anything but irritate some people along the way, and said that if we were going to work in an area that covered 26 counties, we were going to visit every county. So that's the first thing we did. We went all the way out to the tip of the Panhandle and all the way down into the southwest corner of the state on jaunts that took a van, and we got acquainted with residents. We got acquainted with people in healthcare in those areas, sort of doing our own little impromptu survey of what they considered healthcare needs, and getting a feel for the need to establish an advisory group that had groups that had things in common. And we had one young woman who was a secretary who was from Boston. Her husband was in the Air Force in Enid. She had never been outside of large cities. And we were driving out through the Panhandle, and she had a panic attack because it was all this wide open space. It was interesting dealing with someone who had that reaction just to the place. We made headlines of the paper out in Cimarron County, which had only one stop sign in the county, because we were visiting out there, and we went up on Black Mesa, and we saw the green gravel and the dinosaur tracks and all of that. So we started organizing advisory groups that helped to make a plan for the Area Health Education Services program. We had a advisory board, but the board had groups that were addressing the Panhandle's needs, addressing Southwest Oklahoma needs. And it was a good, interesting job. It developed very well, and it's still very much a part of the services there. We took it to a private nonprofit along the way, and it's called Rural Health Projects now, based in Enid, and it's still going, still strong. When I turned 60, I decided that if I was ever going to retire, I had to go back to work for the state, because my health insurance cost went to $1,900 a quarter. And with that, I let it be known that I was interested in going back to work for the state, because I found out that I could buy back into my state retirement and could be covered in retirement under the health care plan. And I was approached to go to work for the state health department because they were going to lose their federal money for their WIC program because they weren't serving enough patients, enough clients, enough customers. And I took that job and worked 3 years to secure my retirement, and I retired early. But that was an interesting, good job in that it used my community organization skills and my knowledge of the state and the people in the state, because I traveled all over the state helping them to focus on customer service as a way to improve utilization. And I was given 5 employees that I worked with. And we did training. We organized an advisory group. And in the first year, the caseload increased over 25%. Trying to do a different focus, delivering services the way clients want it and need it. And that is a skill that I have, is looking at what needs to be done and helping people to organize around what needs to be done and selling it. That it's not going to hurt you to be customer service focused. And during my time at Planned Parenthood, when we did have the boycott of the United Way, we raised over $1 million in 1 year to buy and renovate a building for Planned Parenthood. Got out of the United Way. I brought the board along to look at the fact that there were limitations placed on us because we had federal monies for family planning. And through some really solid people that I had working for me, one of whom was my financial person, we developed a plan to deliver services on a fee-for-service basis, sliding scale, self-sustaining clinic model. And the board, we got them so far and they chickened out. Don't put that.
That's fine.
And I had a nightmare about, I was in the back seat of a car and was trying to reach over and direct it as we were going across the dam, and a tsunami type wave was washing us off of the dam. And I went back to work the next day and talked to my financial person and said, this year we'll make it. And we turned back the federal funds a year later and went on a self-sustaining clinic model with a sliding scale. And our clientele grew because they were given appointments and they were treated like people, and by staff that cared and gave quality service. And one of our goals was that you see a patient within 15 minutes of the time of their appointment if you can't see them right on time. And the way the self-sustaining clinic model worked was our cost was loaded onto the birth control pills. The initial exam was very low cost. And we had to keep a patient 6 months in order to break even on that patient. So keeping them as patients and providing a service that made them want to keep coming to you was an important part of the delivery system. And I had someone who was anti-Planned Parenthood because of their religious faith, who worked for a major city division, say to me one time, why are your customers growing and why do they keep coming to you when they can get totally free service at the city county health department? And I said, because we treat them like people and deliver good service the way they want it and need it. And that got sidetracked back on something else that got triggered for some reason. But I still think that even though I consider my strength administrative and agency and community development and organization, I think I got nominated for this because I was a troublemaker most of the time, agitating for women's health issues and children's health issues.
Well, that's not being a troublemaker. That's being a champion.
And because I had moved to a rural area, they needed someone from a rural area to nominate. How's that for being?
Well, tell me a little bit about Friends United.
About what?
Friends United, Health for All. Does that ring any bells?
Uh-uh.
Okay. I heard you were involved with that.
Friends United?
Yeah. Health for All.
Not under that name.
Okay. Sounds good. What about the Tulsa County Perinatal Coalition?
Yes. That was a community group that worked for better health care for women who were pregnant so you could have good outcomes to deliveries. And we were very active in that. I was very active in that. Also, one group that I was very active in when I first started with Planned Parenthood was a Model Cities grant to Planned Parenthood. One, we hired people who were on welfare and trained them to work in the clinics. And one of the people that we hired retired a few years ago as a clinic manager for Planned Parenthood. I mean, we gave them skills and training and supported them. We also, as a part of the Model Cities Project, were managing a grant which started the Margaret Hudson program. Now, one of the things I will give the person who was head of Planned Parenthood before me credit for is that she saw the need for education for pregnant girls, schoolgirls. And she worked with a social work friend of mine to do tutoring for pregnant girls. And a grant was written to start a school for pregnant girls, which was funded to Planned Parenthood as the source for putting it out to do the job. And the Margaret Hudson program, which was started then, is still, I think, still alive and well. It was a couple of years ago. I went to their 25th anniversary party and helped them to become an independent agency organization with a broad education base. I used my staff to volunteer with the Community Service Council whenever they were doing a lot of urban development in Western Tulsa, to do a study in that neighborhood to see the needs in that area and what urban development might do to that area, and helped the communities that way. I mean, we were an active part of the community. It was just a very small segment of Tulsa that was very much involved in the Right to Life movement that protested so strongly against Planned Parenthood. And one of my less than favorite people in all the world is Tony Lowinger, who is still head of the Right to Life for Oklahomans for Life. He and I confronted each other quite frequently along the way. And in fact, in the early 1970s, we were both in the first public debate about abortion in the state of Oklahoma on the University of Oklahoma campus.
How did that go?
I thought it was very well. I mean, there were several speakers, And we were in that arena that the seats are like this. And I had a friend who was standing up with me when it was about time for and she said, it sort of looks like they're throwing the Christians to the lions. And I said, gee, thanks. That's all I need before I go down to talk. We counseled and referred women who were seeking abortion while it was still illegal to do that. I made sure that they got quality counseling as to all of their options and that their decision was the decision that they made. We were referring women to New Mexico and to Kansas. To begin with, though, and this I think is most interesting, when we first had women coming to us for decision making about the abortion issue, if it was a health-related problem, I could refer them to Hillcrest Hospital. And with a psychiatric evaluation and a medical evaluation, they could get an abortion if it was medically indicated, until they started stacking the decision-making committee at Hillcrest with Right to Life people. And it just shut down. So then we had to refer out of state and help them with transportation to get out of state by seeking donations whenever they couldn't afford it on their own. One of the things I said, I had people who, if I got thrown in jail for what I was doing, they agreed to come and play bridge with me every day in jail. That was a time, but also it centered my concern for a change in Oklahoma's law as well as in the national law. And we had an organization called Moral, Modern Oklahomans for Repeal of Abortion Laws. And that was very active in the state. And then finally there came the Supreme Court decision, which changed things dramatically. And with the Supreme Court decision, we knew that there were some illegal abortion clinics operating in Oklahoma, and that they were, one, abusing women financially by charging a fortune, and also abusing them emotionally by making it ugly and dirty that they had to have an abortion when they got it here in Oklahoma. I did have one doctor that I could appeal to who would do an abortion on a woman who was extremely poor and needed it badly. But I started being concerned about a quality service here in the state and made contacts with Reproductive Services, which is an abortion provider that's centered in San Antonio, Texas, and went down and talked with them about bringing services to Oklahoma. They said they would if I would find a place for them to run a clinic, a medical director, an insurance company that would sell them malpractice insurance, and a clinic director, and hire and train a staff.
That's a lot.
A lot. So I came back home and talked with this friend of mine who put her arm around me and said, you know, like throwing the Christians to the lions. And I knew that Planned Parenthood in Tulsa would not be an abortion provider. So I talked with board members and gave them assurance that I would be a full-time executive director of Planned Parenthood. But in my spare time, I was going to help work to bring a quality, nonprofit abortion service to Tulsa. And we did. My friend became the director, a very good Dr. Andy Mulholland. I talked to him and took him to Texas to meet with the clinic people. He agreed to be the medical director. We got an insurance company willing to sell them liability insurance and malpractice insurance. And we found a building and opened it. We had an open house. The night before we were to have the opening for that clinic, someone broke in and poured acid in all the equipment and messed up the floors. I spent 24 hours up there supervising the cleanup, relaying of carpet, so that we could have the open house at the appropriate time. We also solicited and got a church to manage funds that were to help poor women who needed some assistance. And reproductive services is still active today in Tulsa. So, and I have to keep coming back to the fact that in all of this time, I was raising 3 kids, and they were extremely important in my life. And were my main focus. But I was a very energetic person who was energy efficient in getting things done, and who knew how to work with people to accomplish what you want to accomplish. My youngest daughter, who's now 42, when she was in junior high school, wrote a paper called, and they were supposed to write a paper about their hero. And my daughter, I still almost cry when I talk about it. She said, "My hero is my mother. She cares for herself and takes time for herself. She cares for others and wants to see them have the best. And she loves to teach and help people to do better on their own." And that, to me, was the most important thing I think that ever happened.
Boy, I'm tearing up now.
But that's how I tried to spend my life, because it was the example I was shown by my parents.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And my mother and father were uneducated. We didn't even get into this. My mother was a month away from 15 when they married. Mm-hmm. My father was 18. He worked in the oil field. They had her brother and sister to raise. And they did a wonderful job of launching that brother and sister and 3 kids of their own, and setting an example of how to live your life effectively and how to do it in a way that you made a difference. And to look at the situation, to decide what needs to be done, and to set about accomplishing it. Me and my 2 brothers, all 3 were in essentially helping professions, although my older brother became career military. Both my brothers died very young, at 55.
Wow.
And he was in Korea and then Vietnam, but he also was in the medical services part of it, and became a administrator at the medical facility at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, part of his career. He was also a trainer of paramedics in San Antonio at the military, Army military there. He retired as a major. My younger brother was National Guard, also worked for the Department of Human Services, and was very much an effective person in bringing about some changes to DHS. He and a friend of his helped organize the State Employees Organization and confronted Ellie Rader, who was head of the Department of Human Services at that time, one of the most powerful men in the state of Oklahoma. He also took over and organized the group that helped to get payments from errant fathers for welfare families. And while he was in the National Guard, he worked in the medical end of it. And one time they were in Arkansas in camp, and a storm came, and he had his unit so well organized that they didn't have any deaths in that storm. And he and his unit got invited to Europe to train military personnel in Army bases in Europe on how to handle emergencies. So we all three learned our lesson well, although Mother had never, she didn't graduate from grade school. Father did not graduate from grade school. I did not talk about my grandparents. My grandfather was the mayor, the lawyer, the blacksmith, how he earned his living, and the fiddler in this small town in Roebling. A really smart man, and my mother and father were both smart. And that made a difference in their ability, even though they were not formally educated. My father could solve almost any problem he set himself out to solve. Teach himself how to tear apart a car or to splice a cable, steel cable in the oil field, what have you. And yet, with all of that, they had a great deal of time for us as kids. And in spite of all that I did, I tried to have a great deal of time for my kids. And right now I'm busy not being too responsible for anything except 4 grandchildren and 3 kids, and I have 2 sisters-in-law, widows of my brothers, that I am still extremely close to. And I'm the oldest living member of the family now. So I have been doing some reflecting about I ought to sit down and write a book for my kids about family. And I entitle it Ravings of an Oilfield Brat.
Well, I guess, was it tough moving around, when your dad had to move to a new place?
It did not feel tough for me or my brothers. And maybe a part of it was because once we got into the school setting, we sort of carried our friends with us because they were all a part of my dad's gang. Mm-hmm. And we, essentially, he worked for the same oil company for a long period of time, and then he started drilling and that kind of thing. But we were not aware that we were damaged and should have had problems in moving from school to school. Our social life went with us. And the most important thing, our family stayed tight and close and stayed in touch with the extended family.
Mm-hmm.
So and our teachers were all universally wonderful. I mean, from one school to the other. And our parents were partners with them.
You probably didn't want to get in trouble at school.
Yeah, well, you did not want to get in trouble at school. You did not. I got in trouble one time for pitching pennies and winning all the pennies, and got really angry when Mother took me up there and made me give it all back. Was not a happy camper.
Well, we learn the background we need for our career in many different places. Sometimes it's in the classroom, and a lot of the times it's not. Where are some of the places you learned what you needed for your career?
Well, I think I could not have done a better job of an education to prepare me for what I did than I did with accounting and economics and social work. I learned a great deal of it at my mother and father's knee. I mean, that's what really essentially prepared me for what I did. And then the experiences that I had and grew from, and the supervisors that I had along the way. Anita Hankins was a very significant person in my life, and she helped me to make the most of that first job with the Department of Public Welfare, which is what it was called then. Another significant player in my life was a supervisor at the mental health department and at Eve Austin. One day I went across campus for a conference with her, and I told her, this is what the situation is, and this is what I'm going to do about it, or I think I'm going to do about it. And she looked at me and she said, you do anything you are big enough to accept responsibility for doing. I mean, that was a lesson. And I thought about that and I said, I'm going to do it. Because I was having a confrontation with a psychiatrist that was wanting to do electroconvulsive therapy on a young boy. So I think that you have to give credit for where you are today to all of those people who work together to make a contribution to your growing up. And then to those two recruiters that sent me to college. And to an extended family that pitched in from time to time with a gift of money.
Well, we spoke a lot, or really just skimmed the surface of your career through the many, many years. Can you pinpoint some stumbling blocks or adversity along the way? We kind of alluded to some.
The one stumbling block, or one thing that you have to deal with, is a lot of people's attitude that an aggressive woman is, I'm not going to use the word I thought of. It's not feminine. It's not, a woman should not be aggressive.
Right. And
they do not like that if you are. And there are times when you have to be. You have to stand for what you believe in and set it out and fight for it. That, I guess, could be attitude about women. The conservative Bible Belt mentality of the people in the state of Oklahoma would be a handicap. And the fact that in some decision making, people give in to that rather than stand up and fight it for what's right, because conflict is not good in a lot of people's attitude. The attitude about women in general in Oklahoma. I mean, we have the highest divorce rate in the United States. We've got the largest number of women smokers. Educational opportunities for women are more limited. That needs to change. Valuing women and their contribution and letting them be what they're going to be and focus on something other than the fact that you're getting mad at them. The very first confrontation I had was not being hired to go to Venezuela, although that turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to me. It pushed me in a whole nother career. Mm-hmm. And no telling what I would have turned out if I'd gone there. I mean, things happened, and I adapted and took turns in my life that I wouldn't have taken if that had not happened. Adversity. The whole experience of finding glued nails in the locks in my building, windows knocked out, protesters, that kind of thing, was probably the most difficult adversity. And then dealing with political decisions that were driven by something other than the facts of a situation, i.e. Planned Parenthood in Oklahoma. I did learn how to deal with legislature. One bill that was being considered that was really bad bill was in a committee. And I just happened to be over at the Capitol talking to legislators about it and just happened to run in to someone that had a lot of money and influence with legislature because he gave donations, and he just happened to agree to take a couple of people to lunch so that they were not there to vote to get that bill out of committee. That kind of knowledge of how things operate comes through experience and keeping your eyes open and talking to people and having friends who trust you and know you're not acting out of a self-interest, a self-aggrandizement, but that your focus is on what is best for the people you're working with and for the state of Oklahoma.
Did you ever feel threatened?
Personally threatened?
Mm-hmm.
Only 2 times did I feel personally threatened. One time was when I was a brand new caseworker, and I had to talk to a woman about the fact that she had a man living with her. And in those days, that was an immediate closing of her case for welfare, and she threatened to kill me. Fortunately, I was outside on the street, and I just backed up and sat down and let her talk. And I sat on a fender of a car. And then the other time was with a patient in the mental hospital who was in seclusion. And I went in with a psychiatrist to talk with this patient. And the patient got very angry at the psychiatrist, and I got kicked because I was in the way between him and the psychiatrist. Couldn't get out the door fast enough. I judge when to take risk, physical risk, because that is really the only way someone could hurt you. The fact that people vilified me, and they did. They wrote letters to the editor against me. They wrote letters to judges telling me how horrible I was. A judge wrote a letter to me one time telling me how horrible I was. That as long as I am doing within the law what needs to be done, or I am willing to take the risk for stepping outside of the law, because I would be a law-abiding citizen. I would take responsibility and go to jail if I had to. That's true on driving, speeding. I speed occasionally. I pay my fines.
Well, you shouldn't speed.
I know.
Well, make sure you wear your seatbelt.
I wear my seatbelt now because it yells at me if I don't. I also have a grandson who reminds me that I need to fasten it.
Let's talk about some good things. Let's talk about, key moments in your life that have just been tops.
It's hard to come up with key moments when, career-wise, it has been a progression of services and organizations. And as I said, the most important thing is that I left every agency in better shape than I found it and ready to go on to an effective and viable organization. Key moment when we raised $1 million to buy a building, and I had it paid for in a year when we moved into it. Recent key moment was I just took a week's trip through Arizona and Colorado to the Mesa Verde area with my 15-year-old grandson. And we explored together and did a wonderful time while we went to meet his parents and his uncle and aunt in Colorado. My grandson just is doing great in the tennis team. He's on Agassiz tennis team, second tennis team in Las Vegas. Last year they won the regional tournament. This year they came in third in the regional tournament, his team. I've got twin granddaughters who are 7 years old last week, who are wonderful, different kids. I'm totally different. An 8-year-old grandson that is the smartest thing that ever hit this part of the country. He goes to university school. And there's no telling what that kid will do if he manages to grow up. I mean, he is so smart it hurts. He and I were arguing when he was 2 years old about what kind of dinosaur was pictured on the catalog. And I mean, he is into things like that. And career keys, you know, successfully finishing 18 years as director of Planned Parenthood was a key moment, building it to where it is, and it's still a strong, viable organization today. Seeing people be able to utilize services that they would not otherwise have. Having gotten married at nearly 30 and having a family, having survived losing my husband, and because I was raising, and he died so young, we didn't have much stashed away. So I had a good job that paid good. And unlike many women who are left in that situation, I didn't have to run out and get married in order to be able to raise my children. My kids are doing well. And are close. Not close physically, but close so that we communicate frequently. And I know what's going on in their lives, and they know what's going on in my life. One key moment, that has nothing to do with work, when my youngest daughter went to Phillips University in Enid, we were living in Tulsa. And she called me and she said, "Mother, they've asked me to walk onto the basketball team." She's 6'2". My husband went to college on a basketball scholarship. And I said, "Oh, really?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Well, what does it mean?" And she said, "Well, it means I would get room and board and books and tuition." And I said, "Well, what's the downside?" She said, "I don't know that there's a downside." And I said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And she said, "I think I'll do it." Well, I hung up and called a friend of mine in Singapore who had worked for me as a secretary. And I said, "You have been wanting me to come visit you. My daughter just saved me $10,000. I am going to a meeting in 2 weeks in San Diego. If I can get it worked out, I will come and see you if you still want me to." And I spent every bit of my daughter's money, college money for that year, on a trip that was wonderful. And that was my traveling bug. I spent my 51st birthday on a junk in Singapore Harbor. And nearly got thrown in jail in Hong Kong.
What did you do?
Well, a friend of mine, when we were in San Diego, I told her I was going to buy pearls in Hong Kong because another person in Tulsa had an office in Hong Kong, and their secretary was going to take me to shop for pearls, and she wanted pearls. So we figured out if she wrote a check to my friend in Singapore, he had a business account there, her husband did, that he would cash it for me, and then I would take the cash to shop for pearls in Hong Kong. She wrote a check. That's what we did. He cashed it at his bank. When I left there after 2 weeks, I went to Tokyo first and landed in Tokyo and did not know where I was going to spend the night. And I stayed there about a week, did the bullet train to Hiroshima, toured in the countryside. Then I went to Singapore, and we stayed there 2 weeks. I stayed there 2 weeks with them, and she and I tooled all over Singapore, and he took us up into the Malaysian Peninsula. And So I took the money, flew to Hong Kong. When I got into my hotel in Hong Kong, there was a message from the secretary that said, we've got to go shopping for pearls right now because I have to go to the Philippines. So we went pearl shopping, and I bought the pearls with the $100 bills for her that he gave me. And I had money that I brought to buy pearls. The next day, the office of this person called me and said, you gave counterfeit money for your pearls. You've got to go pick it up right now. I used all of my money that I had on me. They would not take a check. They would not take credit card. I used all of my cash to pick up that counterfeit money. And contacted my friend in Singapore. The upshot is the bank where he banked, a clerk was using the bank to pass counterfeit $100 bills. And I got my money back eventually.
Wow.
But I had to, I met some people from Australia, and they were going to take the airboat to Macau and go into China. And I did that with very little money on me. Came back and flew home, and I had a wonderful trip, and I've loved to travel ever since. And that's what I've been doing the last 5 years since my mother died. I've been to China, Tibet, and Spain, and Egypt, and Mexico, and Alaska, and Canada, and I'm going to Turkey next month.
Wonderful.
And that's how I'm spending my retirement, not doing anything effective for anybody. Occasionally, I will do a little bit of political stuff and help elect Barack Obama by doing something I'd never done before, make a donation every month to his campaign.
What prompted you to do that?
Because I thought that he had what it took to try to move us forward in a better way.
Mm-hmm.
And I still believe it.
Well, with your background in social work and in championing health rights and issues, what is your take on the current situation?
I am terribly disgusted at a bunch of old men who have controlled things too long, telling lies to try to regain their power, to keep their power. I mean, they are distorting everything that healthcare reform is all about. Without a public option, we will not have healthcare reform. And I did send an email to Obama last night saying, if they put a bill across your desk without a public option, you should veto it and ram it down their throat and let them take responsibility for what's going to happen. I mean, we are in a mess. Mm-hmm. Healthcare is one of the driving forces, but I listen to some senator. They sound so serious and so caring, and forget about the fact that it's 8 years that have driven us to where we are, and this free trade and free economic growth that they tout is what got us in the mess we're in. The free market. I lost the word. The free market is what got us in the mess we're in. I just heard on one of the, I just bought a new car a year ago. I was driving a car that had 250,000+ miles on it, running back and forth between California and here. So anyway, my nephew helped me shop for a good bargain on a car. And he gave me the radio, satellite radio. Oh, it is wonderful. I listen to CNN and POTUS and
you have so many more options.
So many more options. And I listen to all the political commentaries, and I just, drive across the country and yell at the radio. I mean, they make them sound so caring and so solid when they are distorting things right and left. So anyway, I am also mad at Obama for not being more assertive with defining what he wants in the healthcare bill. But I said, if it comes across your desk without a public option, you need to veto it. And I believe that very strongly because, without a public option, the insurance company is going to win again. Mm-hmm. They're going to win again. And I went to a hearing and made comments. I was interviewed on OSU radio from the hearing in Oklahoma City, Mary Fallon's hearing. Mm-hmm. But I can accept the fact that change comes slowly, but I think that healthcare is one of the major things we really need to focus on. I'm also concerned that maybe his financial people are a little bit leaning too heavily on the bank sides and not pushing enough in terms of reform in that arena. But what I started to tell you, I heard on a call-in from a hearing in Massachusetts that the United Insurance Company executive makes $102,000 an hour in his salary. Now, if that is wrong, I'm sorry I quoted a wrong figure, but if it's right, that's obscene.
Yeah.
And no one disputed it.
It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yes, it will be interesting to see what happens. I have high hopes for Obama and for what he's trying to do. I think he's got some smart people that he's working with. I think it's too bad that his first Daschle, his first pick, did not get it because I think he had the connections to try to move things along. But Sebelius is a wonderful person, and she's smart, savvy, and I think it's going places for the future. But it's going to take all hands. I mean, the last throes of a dying breed are very problematic. And I think that's what we've got. They showed a picture. Can you tell that I have threatened my kids with death and coming back and haunting them if they do not put in my obituary that she was an unabashed liberal Democrat?
Good for you.
I mean,
they better do it too.
They better do it, and they know it. They also, because of some things that we've dealt with in our family with death and dying, my youngest brother died of lung cancer. My oldest brother, we had to appeal to a committee in Texas to get him off life support when it was time to get him off life support. My mother's dying was more peaceful. My mother-in-law's was problematic. And so my kids have come to realize that my end-of-life decisions are pretty valid, and I think they will do it. They won't try to keep me alive when I should not be kept alive. And that issue of the counseling that was written into the healthcare bill was put in first into another bill by Republicans. And it's just counseling to help people to make decisions about what they want in the way of treatment at their end of life. And we do that now with living wills.
Sure.
But now then, that's going to come out. They're talking about pulling the public option out of it. But I write letters. I consult with my friends who are writing letters to the editor. I wrote a letter to the editor in January when I was here in Tulsa. And somebody attacked me that I knew because of it in a letter to the editor. But it's something that's going to have to change.
Well, it's good to see that you're still very much pushing for the advocacy.
Oh, I try, but on a limited basis, in between trips.
Absolutely.
My mother died 5 years ago, and I no longer had to stay in Oklahoma to take care of her. And she lived in Wewoke, and I lived 30 miles away. And my daughter said, "What are you going to do, Mother?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to sell my house and decide what I want to do if I grow up." And she said, "Why don't you go live at our place out in Death Valley, Tacopa?" And they've got a little shack out there. They live in Boulder City, Nevada. And I said, "I think I will." I sold my house, put my furniture in storage, haven't seen it for 5 years. I spend winters out there, which is 2 blocks from Hot Springs Baths, and travel in the summertime. And run back and forth, seeing grandkids out there and grandkid here. And living a life that I feel very comfortable with. Now I'm getting old and a little less able. I'll be 77 this year, soon. And I'm going to have to quit loading a car up and traveling so much. That requires physical exertion. But I've got some things on my bucket list I want to do before that happens. I want Australia and New Zealand for 6 weeks. And I want Machu Picchu and the Galapagos. So I want to do those things.
Well, good.
So I have my bucket list.
I think that's important.
Yeah. And I only do those things politically that I can do. Like I was a spy when Karl Rove spoke here in Oklahoma. I went to that, and I still get mailings from the Republicans because I had to donate money to go to the Karl Rove appearance. And I can understand he is a vital, dynamic speaker. And devious.
Well, 1993 was a long time ago.
Yeah.
That was the year you were inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame. Do you remember that time?
Yes, I remember the induction and the fact that my daughter went with me to that dinner. And, as I say, when I was first told that, my first reaction was, "Why me?" And then I decided it was because they needed someone from the rural area to induct. And I had gone rural in the process. And then, I decided that my life has made a difference. And that this was sort of a validation of a long period of time that was effective in making change happen, or trying to make change happen, and trying to see that people had better services. Yeah, 93 was a long time ago.
Well, how do you feel that, people on your staff looked up to you, maybe saw you as a role model? How did that affect you?
Um, I always felt the responsibility to do the best job I could do for my staff. And to give them what they needed to do the job that they had to do. I knew they had to trust me and they had to be able to count on me. Like when someone tried to pressure me to fire a staff person because they had failed in their job as a committee member, not because my staff person had, but this person who was in a position of influence. And I wouldn't do it. That I could stand up for them. They knew I would stand up for them. So they could freely go about their work. And yes, I still have friends who were employees and colleagues. In fact, the person I stay with here in Tulsa was my secretary at one time. And we are pro-choice people together. We work together for that, even today. Another employee colleague and I are still very close. I think that they did respect me and look up to me, but also saw me as a co-worker to accomplish what we had to accomplish. I mean, when we went self-sustaining, I would take staff once a quarter on a day off into training so that they could do the best job that they could possibly do. And do a training retreat. And they had very clear expectations made to them. And I think that's been true of all my jobs as an administrator. That people know where they stand with me. They don't have to wonder. And that if they have a question or problem, they could bring it. And we would struggle with it together. And if they had suggestions as to how to do a better job, that I was there to listen to them and to put all of this together into something that was bigger than the sum of the parts. I mean, that's the key that in working with people. You can really be bigger than the sum of the parts and do a better job than you can by yourself. I hear from lots of people that I've worked with in the past. Letters, emails, visits. And I value. And they were not people that didn't matter. They mattered. And I was really good at hiring the best person for the job to begin with.
That's usually a challenge in itself.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what does this honor mean to you?
I think primarily it's a validation of that I have made a difference. That my life has not been wasted. It's been spent in things that were important over and above my family, which has been the most important piece of it.
Well, if you could tell Oklahomans anything, give them a little nugget of advice, what would you tell them?
There is something about Oklahoma and Oklahomans that makes us more afraid. That my advice would be, don't go through life clutching yourself in fear. I mean, it's a victim mentality. It's something, we take great pride in the fact that, not one Oklahoma County went for Obama. That God and country prevails here above reason. That's a tacky comment. That being the buckle of the Bible Belt is not necessarily the way you ought to go. We have had a few really key people. Like, I consider Bellman one of the last statesmen that we've had in office in Oklahoma. He voted what was best for the people rather than what was best for his party or himself. On the canal issue, and he was vilified because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're real quick to vilify people who don't act and think and feel just the way we do. And we're a state of diversity. And we do not celebrate diversity as a state. I could start naming politicians we need to get out of office. But, I don't know what kind of advice. I value women more.
Mm-hmm.
In what they can do and what they have done educationally. There is a reason that we have one of the highest divorce rates in the United States.
And for the women who, plan to take similar roles as they move through life, maybe enter social work or become troublemakers, do you have any nuggets of wisdom for them?
Don't sacrifice your life for your career. Don't martyr yourself. Learn to laugh. Don't take yourself too seriously. Have friends. Be willing to take risk. Don't be afraid of that. It doesn't hurt to get fired for standing up for what you believe in. Doesn't hurt to have letters to the editor saying how mean you are. Be passionate about what you do and what you believe, because that means something to people if you really and truly believe and are passionate about it. Reach out to others to gain knowledge and information and ideas from them. But be sure and give credit where credit is due outside of yourself. What else? Run away occasionally and get renewed in whatever way renews you. When I was raising children and being director of Planned Parenthood and very active in church, I would volunteer to go on reaffiliation reviews as the executive director on a review team. And when I did that, I would always take about 4 days of vacation either before or after. Or when I went to committee meetings in New York or Washington, D.C., I would take vacation time before or after. And I would rent a car and go traveling. I have seen every state in the United States except Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire in short periods of time, and come back refreshed and ready to tackle things again. And we have to not get jaded or get so deep in a rut that we can't see the broad picture, the broad horizon. I had one male employee one time who told me, he said, "You have the best ability to look at the horizon and make judgments and plan actions based on it, to get the information you need and determine what course of action to take. But if you're in a rut, you can't do that. And if you don't appreciate all of the contribution that others can make, you don't do that."
We made mention of many people throughout the interview. I just want to make sure that you could, just tell us a little bit about or make mention of anybody who played, that key role in your life. You mentioned your parents and
my siblings and teachers. The 2 recruiting officers, supervisors who helped me to learn social work and the politics of organizational structure, which is very important. My own children. I can't think of anyone else. I mean, it's just all of those people who have been a part of your life.
Well, when history is written about you, what would you like for it to say?
She was an unabashed liberal Democrat. That's number one. She sought to make a difference, sought to make things better. I raised 3 functioning, happy, loving, caring children, and who are doing a good job of raising their kids. And that still give a great deal to me in support and love. That's my key contribution. I don't know.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't spoken about today?
I don't know what it would be. I cannot think of anything. I've been retired for 13 years now. And have been relatively satisfied with my life and what I did. One time, someone said to me, if you had your life to do over, what would you do different? And I said, nothing, given the circumstances and the things that happened in my life. Now, if I was rich and stood so damn good looking, I'd travel more. But, we do the best job we can do with the brains God gave us, with the circumstances that we live in, with the resources that we have at our disposal, and with the people that are meaningful to us in our lives. And I don't regret anything that I have or haven't done. Now, given different circumstances, I would probably do a few things differently. And something just popped into my mind, which doesn't make sense that it came in. I had fired an employee for using drugs on the job, for not doing their job, just before my husband died. And the day that it appeared in the paper that my husband died, I got a call that said, you get what you deserve, you mean bitch. But from time to time, one of the hardest things we do is fire people. But from time to time, that is necessary. I had one firing appealed, and I won the decision. They tried to say I was discriminatory, and I was not. But for the most part, I have been very fortunate to have extremely good people come into my work situation that I could hire, and who gave me their best, and left happy with it, that they had done a good job too. But we all make mistakes, and I made one or two in my life.
Sounds good.
But in thinking through, I probably did not get nominated for this because of my administrative work over a period of years, but I consider that my major contribution.
Well, I think with a lot of the women that we interview who are nominated at different points in their career, you almost have to look at their body of work. You may peg yourself as they just needed a rural nominee, but I think when you look at a woman's body of work who are in the Hall of Fame, I mean, they all just blow you away. So.
Well, I've worked many years and feel good about it.
And you've made a difference.
Hopefully. That's been my goal.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate you helping us document the women who have been inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame.
You are welcome. I'll look forward to seeing what you turn this into.